Hello, gorgeous humans. Yes, welcome to another food forest. This time we are actually starting to get our hands dirty and get into the content that we want to cover in the next year. I was thinking it will be good to start today with kind of meta themes, things that we are going to come back to again and again and again forever. And things that have to do with kind of overall premises that we want to deconstruct and let go of all kinds of moving towards more mature stances, and really looking at the meta level of the main premises that Western hegemony is running on, or coloniality, all of these systems that we live under. Now, before we start, so basically I called it false premises and our shared context. I think it's important, right? Before we can start to imagine what other futures are possible for us, we want to examine the current context that we live in, the current shared stories that we have together, and maybe so we can imagine different stories. Before we start, I just want to say this is not a lecture. I know we are used to this kind of dynamic of trickle-down hierarchical way of giving knowledge. This is simply the kind of crops that I gathered in my own food forest so far, things that inspire me, things that I've begun to explore, things that I feel are important and need more attending. But it's all to open a discussion so we can study them together. I'm sure all of us are coming from different backgrounds, from different levels of knowledge on different particular things, from different levels of experience. And each of us have a unique disposition, a unique expression of life that is synthesizing very particular worlds of knowledge into very unique way of expression that is impossible to repeat. And so this is an invitation, right? Like I'm going to put out, maybe spend the next hour, we're going to put out some of the overall themes, and then we can open a discussion and develop them together in the next weeks and in the next years, and allow them to keep reverberating throughout the ages, you know? So yeah, as I'm sharing things, I'm going to go over them relatively quickly, just kind of like gloss over some of the themes. Remember that we are going to go very deeply into each one of these in their own dedicated session, so there is no hurry, but I feel like it's helpful sometimes to get like a big picture kind of overview and then get more specific about things. So as I'm speaking, if something comes up for you and you feel like, oh, that's something that actually resonates with me and I have something to share about, maybe take notes, write it down so you can remember later when we open the conversation. Just an invitation. Yeah, sounds good. Shall we start? Beautiful. So let me just move this thing here. Beautiful. So the first meta theme is an overall kind of shift in our attitude, in our posture of going beyond fragmentary models. There is a lot to say and a lot that is going to be said on how language specifically, the way that we use language, the way that language is structured, most of the languages that we are using, especially English, is inherently fragmentary in how it contributes and creates these fragmentary ways of seeing the world. But here specifically, I want to talk about it more generally. These unique ways in which unique worldviews that we have that I feel like stand at the core, at the center, at the beginning, at the origins, at the top of all of the kind of ways in which we interact with reality personally and collectively. that bring about the kind of realities that we see all around us: oppression, racism, bigotry, genocide, exploitation and extraction, and climate collapse, and all of that stuff. Yeah. So some of the fragmentary models, and by the way, again, everything that I'm sharing is going to be limited and partial. That's the point. You know, I can't think about anything and everything all the time. This is why we're here together to develop this. So the first, and I think the biggest fragmentary model, is anthropomorphism. I think one of the biggest themes of this collective is imagining post-human realities in which humans are not at the top of the pyramid, dominative pyramid over everything else in nature. A kind of predisposition that makes us look at everything as means to an end, something to extract resources, whether it's the ecology, the soil, people, the air, water, everything. Yeah. That's, I think, a fundamental fragmentary worldview that we have that shows up in all kinds of, in all the levels of how we live, from the very top collective way in which we are extracting resources from nature, looking at this planet as a resource to extract, to the ways in which we are, of course, treating everything on this planet that is not human, and of course, the way that we treat each other, because when you start creating this fragmentary vision, everything becomes fragmented. And then there is also humans who are more worthy than other humans, and so on and so forth. Once we are not creatures of the earth that comes from the soil, then there is infinite fragmentary to be made. But it's also showing up in and everything that we are talking about here, it's not some systemic things that are outside of ourselves, right? Like, we are products of those systems. The way that we show up, the way that we love, the way that we live, the way that we die, the way that we move in the world are very much informed by those things, no matter how awakened and deconstructive we think we are. It's a process. We are always in a process. And we practice anthropomorphism in so many ways in our life, right? I'm noticing myself walking down the garden and picking a fruit and just sitting and not even thinking about it, you know? And then I stop and I was like, oh, what? There's a creature here, right? It's a creature who's been working tirelessly to produce this magnificent sweet thing that I just put in my mouth. What about giving something back? What about asking for permission, right? This is from the biggest to the simple of things. And I think this is part of why it's so beautiful to do this as a collective, because we can start bringing down all of these big themes, meta ideas and structures and systemic ways into the ways that we actually live our life. Yeah. Other fragmentary models that we have is, for example, the scientific tables. Foucault has done tremendous work on the topic. I'm not an expert on Foucault, but I read a few of his books. And he speaks about how there is no knowledge that is not political, that is extracted by systems of power and is connected to systems of power, right? Think about it. Even your height, for example, right? Like, I'm so-and-so centimeters. What is this measurement system, right? Like, where does it come from? Do we have the inches and the meters and inches of centimeters? Those are produced by particular hegemonic systems of power. How do we measure things? How do we fragment things? And then we have the scientific tables, like the timetables, biological scientific table that divide and devise and infinitely fragments everything in the biosphere into smaller and smaller and smaller parts. You know, we used to have the atomic theory model, which used to be super prevalent, still is, but now in modern atomic theory, we know that the world is, atoms as well can be divided into smaller and smaller and smaller parts and so on. And then we have quantum physics, who completely, broke it all out of the park and got us into a whole other dimension of probability. Nevertheless, the more we discover, the more we learn, the more we see that things are more and more and more entangled than we once thought. And then more we see that these kind of ways in which we are seeing reality and devising reality and fragmenting reality in the way that we approach it contribute very directly. First of all, is produced by systems of power, but also contribute to the way that we see reality and then the way we interact with reality. if everything is to be divided, everything is to be controlled. Yeah. So scientific tables, atomic models, and then alternatively moving into models and ways of being and ways of experiencing and seeing reality that have to do with a more entangled rhizomatic. Rhizome comes from the um, in opposition to arborescent, things that grow from a particular source and grow upwards, one directionally, like time as we perceive time, but instead seeing things as rhizomes. So even evolution, as we perceive it, doesn't grow from one point to another, but also grows to all directions, and so on. So things in more entangled, more rhizomatic way. My apologies, I skipped the first thing that the first note that I put here. I'm speaking as I'm looking at my notes. So what I wanted to start with actually, doesn't really matter the order, but what I wanted to start with is first and foremost, our entirely skewed historical context and shared narratives. We first of all see, like I just mentioned, evolution as a linear progress, and particularly in general, just how evolution, biological evolution grows, but also specifically the ways that we see history, the way that history is told in modernity is that we had these like very clearly divided periods of time that have this like linear progression in evolution. So we started from hunter-gatherers, then we went to the agricultural evolution, and then the industrial evolution, and so on and so forth. Upon observation, and David Graeber and some other archaeologists and anthropologists and other academics did phenomenal work on the matter. There's a particular book, I'm going to put it in the resources, Dawn of Everything, that kind of deconstructs a lot of these ideas based on more contemporary archaeological knowledge and understanding. But basically, we know now that we had incredibly complex, incredibly diverse, magnificently progressive and complex and advanced societies that far preceded the period that we are calling the agricultural revolution, industrial revolution. Places like Göbekli Tepe, places like here in Mexico, not so far from where I'm at, in Palenque, but also in Teotihuacan, closer to Mexico City. We are discovering more and more and more societies that have had pretty complex political systems, all kinds of interesting forms of direct democracy, all kinds of socialist. So, for example, in Teotihuacan, they discovered a whole city that looks like a neighbor. In the first, they thought it's the neighborhood of the elite, of the rich people, and then they realized that the entire city lived like that. There was no classes. There is nothing that exhibits any kind of different or disparity in the way that people lived. And that's like tens of thousands of years ago, a lot before, so just kind of all of these things that break down the kind of narrative that we have. And of course, the erasure of indigenous cultures, the erasure of indigenous knowledge, looking at the indigenous people as kind of like hunter-gatherer savages that were like these combobulated by reality, not really sure where they are at or what they are doing, until, of course, the enlightened white saviors came and showed them the way. Now we know that it's all complete nonsense, and largely speaking, these white people were pretty unhygienic and ridden with diseases and pretty stupid in terms of the way that they saw the world in general, in terms of science and so on. And so, yeah, a lot to deconstruct there. And I think this is a good place to start, because history is not just events that happen in the past. It's a dialectical process that creates who we are. We are our histories. So when we see history in that particular skewed vision, it also makes us live reality right now and generate certain futures that are in alignment with that kind of history. And what kind of futures and presents can be generated when we see the vibrant, rich, wise deeply connected to Earth histories that we also have, this wisdom that we have in our ancestry that exists in our own bodies, what kind of futures can be created then? We realize that this very fragmentary, Westernly hegemonic modernity is a fluke in the vastness of human existence, and that we have been, in many, many, many ways, far wiser, far more connected in other periods of life, to some degree in some aspects. But yeah. Okay, then the next thing was the fragmentary models. We talk about anthropomorphism, scientific tables, time, biology, the atomic theory, all of these models that are looking at reality in a fragmentary way. And I'm always coming back to remembering something that always blows my mind. It's a kind of like a logical argument in which, if we really look around, everything that we are discovering, the more we discover about reality, no matter at what field, through which lens, historically, biologically, anthropologically, physics, astrophysics, quantum physics, philosophy, whatever, things always point out to how things are more connected and more entangled than we once thought. The more we discovered, the more everything is more connected. We never discover something greater or bigger or deeper than what we knew before. We never expand our knowledge in a way that teaches us that things are separated or more fragmentary than we thought. And I think that's something to always remember, right? Like, perhaps when we don't see the connection, it's because we don't see the connection, because we don't have the software that shows us the connection, not because the connection is not there. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Moving on. Going beyond binaries and polarities. So another way in which we are epistemologically living in a fragmented headspace and worldviews is we have these like inherent fragments. So there are binaries and polarities that we operate from. There are many, but I want to just mention three pretty dominant ones. We have, of course, the gender, man-woman thing, the binary view of gender, which of course is completely made up and constructed artificially and culturally. Neither through gender expression, neither through sex. The more we discover, the more we see that gender is happening on an infinite spectrum, and so is sex biologically, not just in humans, in the whole of nature. And yeah, we all know what kind of patriarchal dominative hierarchies this kind of man-woman binary is creating the way that we live life as a cultural possibilities. We have men versus nature, which kind of trickles down from the overall anthropomorphic vision. There is this one species that dominates, and then the rest of nature, men versus nature. And I just want to add that kind of men versus nature shows up not just in the way that we live in this extractive way, but also in very minute details, in the way that we, for example, say in language, I'm going to nature, right? Like there is this, as if cities outside of nature, as if human spaces are outside of nature, as if there is this separation. And again, like I mentioned in the beginning, a lot of these fragmentary models and false premises and logics exist in our language, in the way that we speak and how it creates realities, right? I'm just in the process of writing an essay about how nature doesn't really exist as a thing. It's all part of the same process. And then we have, of course, and this, of course, very prevalent as well, the body-mind. We have this through the Enlightenment, European Enlightenment, there has been this growing model through which we see reality, in which there is mind as something that is separated from matter, transcends the body. But it also goes the other way. There is a lot of movement, especially in kind of, let's say, new agey spaces, to go back to the body. There's a lot of this go back to the body, come from the mind to the body in a way that negates sometimes critical thinking in places that is very needed. Something that I've observed a lot happening throughout the pandemic is how white spiritual spaces became very anti-vaccination, anti-science, anti-intellectualism in ways that kind of like exacerbated from even what we've seen before. And I think a lot of it is part of it. We are either in the mind or in the body, as if they are not the same thing, as if consciousness is not something that exists. Everything in nature, everything thinks, everything feels. Something that we will get to in a moment. By the way, I'm going over pretty quickly on things. Is the speed okay? Are we good? Okay. Beautiful. Okay, next we have from apocalypses and utopias to infinite becomings. I think this is something that is very prevalent in the way another kind of worldview that we operate from, especially like both in liberatory spaces as well as reactionary conservative spaces, which is either seeing the world with some kind of cathartic, waiting for some cathartic apocalypse. You know, you can see it in the Christian rapture or the Zionist visions of apocalypse, or even kind of Orthodox Judaism of the third temple coming from the sky. And I think also in liberatory spaces, we imagine these kind of perfect utopias and forget that everything is a progress, everything is a process that is happening constantly. And so going beyond these kind of apocalyptic end of days, waiting for some catharsis, perfectly tight, neat endings, closures, and remember that everything is a vast, infinite process of becoming. It is always unfolding, and we are parts of it, just processes in the process. And of course, deconstructing infinite growth and immature progress. And I think this is something that shows up in very many facets of the logics and premises of modernity or the capitalist social machine that we live in. There is this sense of infinite growth, not only in the collective sense of like the system itself, in the logic of it itself depends, in order to survive, depends on continuously, infinitely growing. It cannot exist without infinitely growing, which is, of course, impossible because we live on a planet with planetary limits that are finite. So in and of itself, boom, we deconstructed the capitalist social machine. It doesn't make sense. And also immature progress. There is this sense that progress is above all, is the thing. But as we have been seeing in the past couple of decades, in the past couple of 100 years, we have adopted as a species a notion of progress above all, but very immature progress. We go for things for their immediate impact, technologies, whatever developments we're talking about, without thinking about their externalities, their wide boundary consequences. That is on the grand scale, but there's also the way that we live our lives, right? Like how we show up in the world, how we love, live, do intimacy, be in relationships, in way, do work, in ways that take these kind of ideas of infinite growth, of eternal summers, and constantly hustling and being in the movement and being in movement and doing and doing and doing, as well as operating in different ways that portray an immature sense of progress, like I'm going to do what I want regardless of consequences. And so both on these collective and personal scales, how do we come from infinite growth to living more cyclically, from immature progress to a more mature progress, and coming back to the ecological context within planetary limits that we live in. And one worldview that I feel I'm kind of working through articulating, but how an animism, an animistic planetary story is not a religion or a belief system or a premise, but rather a very observable, very kind of empirical survival strategy that our ancestors intuitively, cross cultures, cross millenniums, came into naturally. by interacting with their environments and experiencing how everything is alive and spirited, how everything is constantly engaging in imaginative world making, in feeling, in sensing, right? The consciousness is everywhere, from which animistic attitudes arrived, right? So this is something that I feel like could be potentially a very good alternative story that doesn't require any belief systems, that can work with whatever other religion or idea or ideals or whatever philosophical system, it can work really, because it's something that I feel like could be far-reaching, directly observable, directly experienced, and it speaks to people. It's an exciting vision. We need a story. We are storytellers. We need a story, and we need alternative stories. And I feel like animism is a pretty solid story that provide not just a myth, but also a very valid survival strategy of how to relate and be in this alive biosphere that we emerged from, and how to relate with it in a way that allows it to be reciprocal and sustainable. Yeah. So as we are talking about coming from immature to mature progress, we can also talk about, in general, I want to start developing and suggest this framework of going from mature to from immature to mature stances, and breaking what I like to call hell loops. These dichotomic binaries that we can observe on all levels of our culture in the way that we live life. And I want to give a few examples that I was kind of working through and thinking about, but I think the more I'm sitting with it, the more examples come to mind. And I feel like this could be potentially a very exciting and very interesting framework to work on. When we look around, we live in a very polarized reality, right? There is left and right politics, this and that. It's all like this or that, this or that, this or that, man or woman, mind, body, all of these things that we mentioned, and a lot more, yeah? There is something, I feel like this kind of orientation, rather, to try to find those polarities, those dichotomics, and kind of include and transcend them to find a mature stance at the center, to find a mature stance to move with, which I think is incredibly, incredibly important. So this is a few that I was kind of working through. I'm sure you guys will have a lot of other ideas, and this is why I feel like it's exciting, because it's one of these things that you're like, oh, you orient towards something, it opens your mind towards something, and then like, oh, wow, you start seeing it in different places. So the dichotomy of nihilism versus eternalism, meaning, like eternal meaning versus meaninglessness, right? Both of which produce all kinds of, nihilism produces apathy and carelessness. Eternalism produces, all the kind of guilt and shame and lack that Sky Daddy theologies have been bringing us. So this is the hell loop, right? The mature stance will be something like meaningness, which is how meaning making is a relational thing that is being created by interaction with reality, with each other all the time. There is no inherent meaning, and it's also not entirely meaningless, because our, let's say, existence here as thinking, living, breathing, feeling beings, and so as all other beings like us in the biosphere, our whole existence is about experiencing reality and creating meanings in it. So it's meaningness, right? We have hell loops like reactionary, like the conservative, reactionary kind of fear mongering on one hand, and then helplessness on the other hand, which is very prevalent in the liberatory spaces or revolutionary spaces, right? Or, just people who care politically about the world. So we have reactionary, which pushes people towards fascism, fascistic passions, and then helplessness on the other end, which pushes people towards depression, lethargy, and so on. A mature stance would be to orient towards joyful usefulness, right? So it's not something that comes, it's not a joy that comes from looking away from anything, We look away of anything, but we derive joy from being useful, from making ourselves useful and interacting with the world in a way that is meaningful to us. And we cultivate joyful usefulness. I like this particular thing, joyful usefulness. You probably noticed that I'm repeating it a lot in different places. I feel like it's a attitude of being, it's a posture of being that could be potentially very, very helpful in the reality that we are experiencing right now. Okay, we have another hell loop is similar to nihilism, internalism, but slightly different kind of aspects: religiosity and secularism. We have on one hand this like meaning from above, systems of how to be, which on one hand creates very important sets of meaning and purpose for people. It creates community, but has, I don't need to tell you all the kind of side effects of religion. And on the other hand, we have secularism, the kind of, let's call it European secularism that we've been seeing in the last couple of 100 years, and how people slowly move away from religion, but move into capitalistic consumerist society as or replace religion in other kind of hazardous ways. One of these examples could be even a MAGA, or like all these kind of different ways in which people replace the systems of community and meaning and purpose the religion used to give, but in a way that is nonetheless part of kind of a consumerist, capitalist, institutionalized systems of power. So a mature progress will be to move towards vividness, right? It's orientation towards coherence, towards clarity, towards the sacred, not the sacred because it's imposed from above, but because nothing is sacred, so everything can be, right? Looking at how the rejection of the sacred in the secular society as a consumerist push makes people, oh, like you don't have this kind of systems of purpose, of community, of meaning. So we replace them with like, oh, buy this shit and then you'll have some meaning in your life, you know? Another hell loop is futurism and conservatism, which you can also replace with progress and regress, reformism and totalitarianism, transhumanism and accelerationism versus a return to a white supremacist glorious past, or even a return to some more leftist notions of the noble savage, like these glorious indigenous people who used to live and were like perfect and we have to model them, shit like that. So moving from this hell loop and towards a more mature stance, which is embracing the past, present, future continuum, connecting to ancestral wisdom as chain of wisdom that we are part of, moving towards mature progress, which is not the futuristic progress of transhumanism or accelerationism, which is progress above all constantly, no matter what, but more mature progress that takes wide boundaries and externalities into account. And of course, the kind of revolutionary dreams that live in the paradoxes between the ways in which societies, on one hand, in order to exist, the social machine needs to be perceived all at once. All the laws, all the institutions, all the rules, all the codes. In order for them to be valid, the subject need to perceive them all at once. And on the other hand, all of the stuff that the society is dependent on, like all the resources, the people, the land, the gas, all the stuff, those are always happening. The technology, they're always happening in progress. So you have this paradox in between, which I feel like is part of that loop, from which the idea of reformism and totalitarianism both come from. The reformists say he tries to approach the social formation that is this like stabilized all at once thing, and he tries to approach it as, oh, let's improve it over time, which never works, obviously. And then the totalitarianism tries to take the things that the society depends on, like the resources, the humans, the ideas, all that can be known, and totalize them into one unity, which is obviously also false, because we are not like the identity of this society, all of the resources that it depends on, they are all processes. You can't just put a stamp, stabilize it, and now this is who you are and what you are. It's a completely made up idea. So that's the error. So instead, we are moving towards the revolutionary who lives in the kind of in-between space and can embrace both. He lives in the paradoxes, in the gap spaces, in the liminal spaces of past, present, future that flow into each other and constantly create each other. He's connected to ancestral wisdom, but also look towards the future to use current technologies that we have in a mature way that takes a wide boundary lens and externalities into account. And yes. And then last hell loop that we can break, but of course not least, I'm sure you guys are coming up with all kinds of other ideas. We have something that I like to think about is self-sacrifice versus self-obsession. We have the self-sacrifice that you can see a lot in kind of purity culture of Christianity and some other even more kind of Eastern cultures that are about like getting away from the body, away from the needs of the body. And on the other hand, you have self-obsession, which very much prevalent in the capitalist social machine, that is all about self-love, self-care, self-work, inner work, all of this kind of obsession with the self. And we break that hell loop by making life about something bigger than the self. So it's not about self-negation, but rather a recognition of the self as an inseparable part of the whole. And then making that life of that sense of self, as arbitrary as it is, about something bigger than the sum of its parts, about something that is, greater than itself. I would add, just on a personal note, that I found in my personal life, when I have my own personal troubles, I don't know, relational dramas, heartache, heart pain, all kinds of stuff. And I stop for a moment from this contemplative, self-obsessed loop that we sometimes what does it mean and who I am, and doing the inner work and feeling the feelings and all that kind of stuff, they have their place. But if I stop for a moment and I take a breath and I shift the outlook from inwards to outwards and be like, okay, what's around me right now and how can I be useful? Immediately, it changes my attitude, and it shifts my predisposition and the way that I feel in my body, and it creates this very grounded sense of meaning and purpose that takes me out of the loop of the self. So just something, yeah. We're almost done, just a little bit more. I know this is a lot, but don't worry. Every single one of these things, I think we'll have multiple sessions about, we'll have guest teachers, we'll like explore together. Like there is no rush. I just wanted to kind of orient today. Another thing that I wrote extensively about, and I'm still really very much working through, is the idea of going beyond identity and ideology. So it has a bunch of stuff, right? Like first of all, it's decomposing the inner fascists. So for example, the way that we see what's happening in the world and we make it about other people, this particular group of people who is uniquely evil, or these big bad systems, in a way that is outside of ourselves, or in a way that is perceivably separated in ourselves. So reconnecting it and finding all the ways in which we are personally enamored by power, in which we exercise domination and control in our day-to-day life, in the way that we love, in the way that we live and experience intimacy and relate with people and the planet. There are also other ways in which the inner fascist shows up, which I'm sure a lot of you have personal experiences around, which is all kinds of infighting, rigidities, identitarianism, and tribalism in revolutionary and liberatory spaces. You know, you can see, for example, I have friends who've been sexually assaulted by people who are revered in like socialist or revolutionary spaces, you know, like pro-Palestine spaces, or people who are on one hand like very politically aware when it comes to queer rights or transgender rights, but then very Zionist. I like all these kind of things in which our identities trap us in. So, you know, this is I'm not an expert on that particular topic, but identity politics and all this kind of stuff comes into play here. And it's how, again and again and again, like if we don't deconstruct the whole idea of constructed, separated, rigid, stabilized identity in itself, then we are always going to repeat another identity. We're going to liberate from one identity just to be grasped by another identity and then stabilized by it. And then that becomes the whole lens from which you can see reality, which again creates further fragmentation and so on and so forth, further oppression. You know, a phenomenal example on a bigger scale, on a societal scale, is what happened with Jewish people in Zionism, right? Like there is a specifically European Jews. I'm not going to mix in the Arab Jews there because it's a completely different history. But basically, Jewish people who used to be just a religion, not an identity, just a cultural religion, a culture and religion, different cultures, experience particular form of oppression and genocide. Then all kinds of fascistic passions created that completely new identity to liberate from the weak Jew in the shtetl in Europe who can be genocided, created this new identity, a liberatory identity. It is a liberatory attempt, right? Creating this new identity who is strong and national and blonde and blue eyes. And it's like, you can see it in all the slogans of the Zionists from the early days, and still playing a part in the society, just to create a new identity that might liberate a particular thing, but then completely oppressed the rest of the societal potentialities, and of course, another group of people. And so I think this is the identity part is incredibly important to deconstruct thoroughly. And then we also have ideology, which is very much connected, because you can think about ideology as like a collective identity. But I feel like it's a false notion just as much as identity, because ideology is not really a thing. People are processes, social machines are processes, ongoing processes. They are never fixed. They are never stabilized. And so the kind of pitfalls of thinking in terms of ideology that we look at, I don't know, an oppressive society like Israel, for example, and we say, oh, these people, they believe in the ideology of Zionism and they are brainwashed to 1, 2, 3, 4, and this is why this is happening. And although that is a very surface level understanding, and it's definitely a process that is happening in the society, it falls short from grasping the more molecular flows of desire and the places in each and every one of us, in each and every one of the subject of the society that wants and desires their own oppression, that desires fascism, that has an erotic attraction towards power, that the social machine or the ideas of the social machine or the kind of movements that are happening are capturing and organizing towards oppression, towards genocide, towards fascism. And those exist in us all. And so this is where it's part of decomposing the inner fascist, or just the way that I like to call it or conceptualize it, is seeing all of the ways in which our own desire with a capital D, desire that is kind of like impersonal force that flows through existence, that has no aim, but then the social, you can call it libidinal forces or life forces, and the social machines or particular kind of events or material realities can take in and organize towards a particular fascistic direction or revolutionary direction as well, right? So very important to, I think, go beyond this idea of ideology that explains things, beyond the idea of identity that explains things. And instead, embracing molecular multiplicity and moving towards the creative and affirming, this liberation of desire itself. Why do we desire what we desire? Why do desire want its own oppression? Why does it keep happening again and again? And how what we desire, what I desire, is organized in the same ways. Okay, that's I think a pretty fair overall overview of the meta themes that I wanted to open with. Yeah, almost an hour. Perfect. Yeah, I think it's a good time to take a pause here, um, open the discussion and see what came up for some of you. If you have any particular questions on the way that I articulated things, because I know sometimes I have maybe the tendency to speak in language that is not, I don't know, if I in some way was not clear about something, just feel free to ask me what I meant. But also I'm really, really curious and keen to hear what, yeah, what came up for you. So yeah.
One thought I had is that there will be a tendency because of the way that we have been enculturated already to recreate polarities. Like it sounds like you're presenting a lot of binaries for us to become conscious of, right? How they're functioning and shaping us, um, and offering something that transcends those binaries. But I think like I notice in myself anyway, I'll just speak for myself, a tendency to recreate a binary with another one, right? At first, I only recognize the thing that I'm replacing, what I'm trying to create. And then I realize I do it in an oppositional way to something else. So, um, if that makes sense, I guess what I'm seeking is in community, probably because I can only be so self-aware, like how to create guardrails to prevent myself from falling into that trap of that way of thinking that is so habitual, and I'm a scientist, right? So I'm all about measuring and categorizing and using language, knowing it's fallible, but that it's useful. And yet I don't spend enough time, professionally anyway, uh, transcending that way of organizing experience, right?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, completely. We are always, as long as we are using language, we are running, especially English, we are running the risk of continuously. This is why I think, and we are going to get there at some point to talk about language, critical thinking, with people that are far more equipped than I am to talk about it. But some of the things that I've already started exploring is like, how do we reinvent our use of language in different ways? I think there have been amazing people like, I don't know, Lewis Carroll, for example, the way that he uses language to go beyond language in different ways. Deleuze and Guattari, Deleuze is exploring this in The Logic of Sense pretty beautifully. But there are ways to use language to go beyond language that allows us to kind of allow us the flexibility to not get as trapped. Um, but ultimately, this is really like even this kind of way of thinking, right? Like using language while being aware that language creates binaries, noticing some of these binaries and rigidities and fragmentary ways, and then bringing them up, speaking about them, deconstructing them. Like that is, I think, the process of how we, right? Like usually when we are stuck in reactionary versus helpless hell loop, for example, we are not aware that we are stuck in it. So the moment we bring it into awareness, something new can arise that maybe can take the best out of both and create something new that is aware of their pitfalls, and then it continues. I don't know, but yeah, completely. And as long as we have a sense of self, again, like there is a identity that is performing some drama, and that too is in some way constantly producing more identities. So yeah. It's less about replacing one thing with another, with a new thing, but more like breaking the loop and allowing becomings or something mysterious and always in progress, always happening, like an infinite revolution. It's not like we are replacing one social system with another social system, like they did, I don't know, in the Russian Revolution. Like, oh, now we are communism. But when you do that, and then, oh, now the revolution can stop because we replaced one thing in another thing. But of course, the other thing became just as oppressive. So it's like, how do we live in this infinite revolution of constant imagining and dreaming and creating and opening and opening and opening? And I think that's part of the deconstructing these fragmentary ways of being. It's like things needs to be final and decided upon and tightly knit and stabilized. And things never are in the biosphere.
Do you signal out English in particular because of its tendency to nominalize, to create, to turn phenomena into nameable objects, like nouns, literally, as opposed to describing them with dynamic language like an action or a relationship? Is that specifically sort of English?
Yeah, I think European language in general, um, which makes so much sense. Like when you think about, it's amazing from like how you examine reality and histories from different lenses, you discover completely different things. So you ask yourself, like, oh, how come one society out of one continent out of the rest of the world, not the most technologically advanced, not the most scientifically advanced, not the most anything, not the most resource rich, decided to come and conquer the entire world and create this coloniality that we all live under? Like, how did that happen? And you think about language, and it makes a lot of sense, especially when you compare European colonial languages to other, maybe not written languages, languages based on voice. They were a lot less fragmentary. The moment the printing press came, also feudalism started, right? Like feudalism systems, that suddenly there is this like castes and all of the kind of codes of the social machine are directed towards the king. Suddenly, like things can be divided. And so, I don't know. I think it exists in every language, but specifically written language, which, yeah, and even more specifically European languages, not exclusively, but those are the most used languages right now. So I think, yeah, but language in general. And I'm not a linguistic, by the way. I'm very much curious about it and learning more and more about language and different linguistic theories. And it's incredible how mind expanding it is. But my knowledge is very partial on that. By the way, guys, you can also speak. You don't have to write it in the chat if you feel like it. And you don't have to ask for permission. You can just unmute yourself and speak. I know you guys have some things to say. So like, don't be shy.
Oh, I missed the first hour of this, so I'm not sure exactly what to add on to, but I thought it was an interesting comment that was made. So I want to say hello. I want to listen.
What was an interesting comment?
Um, just about not constructing binaries when trying to move away from a system. And like I think about how it's really important to like vision something that you're moving towards as opposed to just saying like the world is garbage. Like we in order like I was at the JVP membership meeting this past weekend, and somebody said something about abolition being like not just about abolishing unjust, broken systems, but also we need to have something to move towards, to dream up, which is like, why having a generative and maybe like openly irrational, like dreaming, sort of having an openness for a vision for a future that's just, and not just defining a future in opposition of what is currently in existence.
Yeah, I think that this is one of the parts that I like about this framework of breaking hell loops, going from immature to mature, like seeking for a mature stance, because a mature stance is also not a finality. It's like I'm seeing the current zeitgeist and the two like oppositions, and I'm choosing something. I see why this would be valid. I see why this would be valid. I'm choosing something. And it's not about like a, centrist or like being, I'm not choosing sides, all this kind of garbage, like it's more like, it's not in opposition. The revolutionary is not necessarily in opposition. He's for, he's in opposition to certain things, of course, but he's for a free world. He's for, liberation. He's for reciprocity. He's for ecological coherence. He's for like dreaming and, like you said, Margot, being irrational. Yeah, and I think we forget it sometimes when we look around and everything is so dark. Any comments or reflections on anything else that was shared today?
I mean, I don't have anything to add except that I did appreciate the talk about different hell loops that we're in, because I wouldn't have ever like used a word like that. I think you've said it before in like your posts and stuff, but still, like the way you just described everything just now helped me understand a lot, because I feel like I'm in constant hell loop. It feels like that's just been my existence, and that the helplessness actually probably is the one that resonated the most. But I just wanted to say that I appreciated I'd like to hear more about the joyful usefulness when we get into our discussions a little bit more, and maybe know how we can apply that. You mentioned one, you said self-obsession, and then there was another one you were talking about, like, you were describing a few of those. Which one was the other one besides self-obsession?
Self-sacrifice.
Self-sacrifice.
Self-negation.
Yeah. I don't know. I feel myself getting like more and more negative, and feeling like I don't know where to go with all of this. And when I say that, I mean like everything feels very inauthentic in my world and my community, even the people that I'm close to sometimes. And I think the reason why I'm here is I like the idea of deconstructing all of these ideas. But I think that's one of the reasons why I'm here, is not so much to make sense of it, but like what to do with it. Where do we go with what I feel like is a massive transition in our time. But I just don't feel like I'm around a whole lot of people who, I don't know, I feel very trapped. And I think that's part of the hell loop. I feel like I'm in the helpless, among others, but the helpless hell loop is definitely one of them. So I just appreciated that you mentioned that, and I'd be really interested to dive in deeper to some of these conversations, and feeling that I can do something a little bit more useful. And I don't know why this came up. Like, it was just like, this is just me throwing something out there, but like my friend went to the Beyonce concert last night and just like started raving about the Beyonce concert. And I fully did not care. Like I did not care that I had to almost like delete the messages because I felt like it was such an empty enthusiasm. But I don't want to also be that kind of like judgy person as well. But it's one of those things that, I want to, this sounds so selfish, but I want to be with other people who are ready to deconstruct all of those things as well and hopefully find a little bit of, I don't know, authenticity. I don't know if I'm making any sense at all, but I guess starting with deconstructing it all is a place that would make me feel like a little bit like I'm excavating a lot of gunk and stuff that our world has been created that I don't even know what to do with anymore because I don't feel like I'm in like we're in a healthy place.
I love that you're here.
Me too.
Also, something that came to me while I was speaking that we didn't really mention today, but I think we'll get to in the more of the summer season, in the eroticism, sexuality, intimacy, is that intimacy cannot happen through conflicts, and actually it cannot happen other than through conflict. I think that now that you're mentioning it, I was also thinking like as one of these false premises that we can deconstruct today is like this idea of aversion from conflict, which I think is very prominent in the way that people either like ignore genocide, choose to be apolitical, whatever the fuck that means, look away from climate change, which is like, bro, we are like at the cusp of a mass extinction event. Like it's already happening. Like how, like what do you mean? Like what else can we talk about? But I think like if we try to understand where is this coming from, it's a lot of this like conflict aversion attitude that we are conditioned into. And then you bring it down into how we intimate, into how we do intimacy with each other, with the planet, with everything. And you see that a lot of it, like look at the models that you have. I don't know, even your parents probably. Sweeping conflicts under the rug, not really speaking up, our hurts, our experience, our aversion of things. And I think that that's part of it. Like, I know that specifically through like Palestine, for example, and my earlier on in the genocide conversations with liberal Zionist, leftist Zionist friends, they were very frustrating, and I don't speak with any of them, but I feel like I wouldn't do it any other way, because first of all, who am I to know where things are going? Like, again, we are looking for this utopian finalitism. Like, oh, I'm going to tell someone the logical thing, and then they will be like, oh, of course, I have to change my mind immediately. No, like, it's a process of becoming. We sow seeds and then they grow, just like in the biosphere. Things are always moving, always being created. So who knows where these conversations will lead? But also because I feel like even though it was conflictual, even though right now we don't speak, it created deeper intimacy than what we've had before, which was based on a lie, right? I had for friends people who thought it's okay to genocide people, and I think that's like when you mentioned, I see this, like, this friend who spoke about raving about this Beyonce concert, like something that I would think about. If it's someone they care about, if it's someone that is in my life, I would tell them how I feel. Not in a superior supremacist way, but like, hey, when you're sharing this with me, my heart is breaking, because I'm on one hand, I'm seeing these like children being massacred in Gaza, and on the other hand, I see these like people going to Met Gala or Beyonce concert. And although I think that joy is magnificent and music is important and healing, and I want you to enjoy, I'm also experiencing this. And who knows, maybe it will send them away, which is completely okay. You have more space for maybe other people who are more aligned with your values. And maybe it will make them think and be like, you know what? I'm happy that you share that with me. That's an interesting thing, you know? I don't know. But we only experience intimacy through this conflict, through going through this. So yeah, maybe, I don't know, something that came up for me when you were sharing.
Can you guys hear me
Yes.
talking? Okay, I'm wearing these Bluetooth headphones the first time. I also really love the hell loop discussion and naming the hell loops so that like you can identify the um, the patterns in your social reality and have a place to start imagining something new. So if we could like re-go over a list of like hell loops, I would appreciate that too, just so I can get some things written down. I would like kind of maybe categorize the friend at the Beyonce concert in a hell loop of consumerism and celebrity. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. I can go over them, but also there is, if you go in the Discord, in the yearly curriculum chat, at the pinned message, you have like the doc, and then you see all of the content of the food forest. So all of the hell loops that I came up with so far in this conversation are in like a comment. You'll see it on the side. But yeah, we had nihilism in eternalism, meaninglessness, moving towards meaningness. So meaning making through relational entanglement. We had reactionary on one hand and helplessness on the other hand. You know, and it's interesting. It also frames it like you start seeing, like when you feel helpless, you start seeing yourself in the same hell loop as the MAGA guy who is also in a hell loop that is like, I don't know what the fuck to do. Everything is so reactionary, right? So there was just different conditions that put them in the reactionary bracket and put me in the helpless bracket, you know, but we all want the same thing. And orienting towards joyful usefulness. Someone also asked, like, what does joyful mean? So let's develop that. But also, I'm thinking about it as the joy that is generated through making oneself useful to whatever is present in their environment, in their community, in the collective, whatever. You know, you take whatever skills, whatever inclinations, whatever particular passions you have, and you utilize them towards usefulness. It doesn't have to be grand. It doesn't have to be, which is touching again the utopian dreams that we have. Like, oh, if it's not perfect, then it's nothing. Like, it's just making oneself useful. And I think that's a very ecologically rooted thing as well, because everything in the biosphere doesn't try to change the entire world, it just does its function and then dies and decomposes and feeds other things. That's it. You know, like we have these like grandiose things of like having this either grand purpose that we are here to exist and function inside a biosphere of other processes and functionalities. That's it. And so joyful usefulness is like the joy that comes from making oneself useful. This is how I'm conceptualizing it. We had religiosity secularism, which is similar to the nihilism eternalism, but more specifically about institutionalized religion, and then institutionalized kind of academia and science, not to be confused with the anti-intellectualism, anti-academia movement, but specifically the part of academia that is secularized as opposition to religiosity, like as an opposition. That, of course, from it come a certain attitude towards nature as this thing that can be infinitely devised, can be controlled, can be exercised power over, and so on and so forth. And so we are moving towards, I didn't find like something catchy for that one, but moving towards the realization that nothing is sacred inherently, so everything can be sacred. So we take the great things about institution, like the great things about religion, like purpose, sense of purpose, and community, and things of that nature, and we take the best things about a more rationalized, secularized way of seeing the world, and we move towards the rejection of the sacred as a consumerist push, moving towards wait, I lost the formula. Okay. So nothing is sacred, so anything can be. So we are basically through rites of passage, through ritual, through just living in relationship with the space that we inhabit, with the other creatures that are around us, we come into this place of awe, of I think awe is a very good cultivating awe, right? So on one hand, we have this like institutionalized divinity that religion provides, but we know that is hazardous. And on the other hand, we have the liberation that secularism or secularist kind of science is providing us. But on the other hand, we also know that it has its hazardous elements, because as revolutionary as it can be, liberatory as it can be, it also has been co-opted by the same capitalist consumerists. And so now science and academia are in the service of the social machine. And so is art as well. So instead, we're moving towards the cultivation, the intentional cultivation of awe. Maybe we can say that. I think as I'm speaking it out, it's kind of working itself. But an intentional cultivation of awe by making things sacred, by finding the sacred, yeah? And of course, and it's something that we're also going to touch in the psycho-spiritual food forest, but developing one's own path that is not, cultivating one's own path, practice, spiritual, ritualized, whatever. And then we have futurism, conservatism, which is, an orientation towards progression and no matter what, versus conservatism, let's conserve something of the past. So inside of it, you have all kinds of reformism and totalitarianism, transhumanism, accelerationism, and all kinds of visions of return to a glorious past, which are usually white supremacist, but not always. There are also leftists, kind of weird, the noble savage return to the past thing. And instead, we're embracing the past, present, future as a continuum of ancestral wisdom. We embrace the wisdom of our ancestors, such as, for example, animism and ritual and rites of passage and social codes and all kinds of attitudes towards their environment. And at the same time, we use technology and we progress, but a more mature progress, something that takes externalities and wide boundary consequences into account. Then we had the self-sacrifice, self-obsession, and instead making life about something that is bigger than oneself. And here there is a place for you guys to add more. I think let's open this up in the, feels to me like the breaking hell loop was the part that resonated most today. So maybe we can build on top of that in the group chat later on in the Discord, kind of if something comes up. But I feel like it's a pretty useful framework. I don't know. I'm starting to think about it more and more and recognizing more and more hell loops and be like, oh, that's interesting.
So organizationally, are you, is your idea to have our meetings and our discussions, our Zoom discussions around these topics and dive deeper, or is that going to stay in the discourse chats? Like how I saw your overall like the map and how you're going to put things into like biomes and food forests and bonfires. So I'm still kind of absorbing how you're doing this. But as far as some of the things that you've talked about and kind of today, as far as like the fragmented models and the anthropomorphism and the history and modernity, are these going to be things that you're going to be doing deep dives into in this type of forum?
Yeah, so I think that the food forests are going to be like revolving around a particular theme, and the themes are like, I put out what I felt most maybe 30-40% of it I feel confident starting a dialogue about. Other things I need other people to step in, or like I have friends, guest teachers, colleagues, people who will like participate. And we can also develop the themes. And this is the food for us. So it's like today. We go and we go over a particular topic, then we open a discussion, we develop it together, and then we continue the development, because sometimes things come up a bit later, whatever.
So I know that there's like a little book club with Bookchin. I started reading it as well. But so if we have these talks, could you like give us, or can you like just tell us like a heads up what it's going to be on, and if there's like any pre-readings or anything, so that like we can like, sometimes you share essays and stuff like that. And then, but when we're in conversation, you'll drop like some names on like who talked about this. And because sometimes when I come in, I'm like, wait, what? And I want to like look things up on my phone while you're talking, because I don't know what the stuff is. So would you be able to give us like resources, like pre-resources?
Yeah, so definitely. That's a good idea. Maybe like before. So first of all, you can see like the notes that I'm going to talk about or want to develop in the doc. Everybody should have access to it. But then also I think it's a good idea maybe before to be like, hey, just like a short kind of the general theme we're going to talk about. Here are some things I'm going to mention or something like that. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Yeah, I can also take like each before the food for a session, I can take like a snapshot or like just copy the theme and put it in so people can see like, okay, this is what we're going to talk about today. Yeah. Amazing. Anything else? We have some silent observers also today. All the faceless people, we see you, we love you. You're here with us. Beautiful. Yeah, feel free to unmute yourself and talk if you want to.
I just put something in the chat, but I'm wondering, like, I'm thinking of this more as like a collaborative idea. Like if we had like a running reading list, maybe Yuval, you could start it, but like with different themes, because I imagine each of us have different areas where we want to go deep, right? We can't possibly cover all the extensions of what we're talking about. That might be separate from the reading group, right? Which is a more focused on a particular text. And then we could add into it, like if you had, in terms of your themes or your binaries, like one thing you talked about was animism, that I would be really interested in thinking more and having suggestions of works to dive into there. And you've probably already done work in that direction, or other people have. So like some kind of living document that might be separate from the curriculum, but kind of supports it, I don't know if that's how interesting, or if that's too much work for you to do, but in one place, because otherwise I lose track of things in the Discord. I notice if I don't extract it at the time it happens, I lose track of the suggestions for what to look at.
So you mean like a list of resources?
Yeah, that people could also add to. Like if I read something that I was like, oh, this was really cool, and here's where I see it ties in with some of these overarching themes, I could just stick it in there. Maybe I'm not saying necessarily I want to have a whole discussion about it, but it could be a seed, like you're
That's a
saying.
great idea. How about I'm gonna copy the curriculum thing. I'm gonna clean it out from like a lot of the stuff around, just leave the content of the food forests, and then I'm gonna put it in the Discord, and then yeah, anybody can come in and add and I will add resources, and everybody else can add as well.
That'd be
Something
great.
like that.
Yeah. I mean, I just imagine as we go through this year, there's going to be so many points of departure that,
Yeah.
where our imagination wants to go, right? And to give me some structure, maybe others.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I'm also excited to go on a journey with you for a year. I'm sure like people will come in and go. Sometimes I attend, sometimes not. But like just having this consistent, I think it's gonna be fucking fun. Yeah, I guess we can also talk about some of these things in the next bonfire. Maybe like even have another go over on certain topics, and then maybe people can say like, hey, this is something that I actually have some I can offer like a lecture on, and then can organize it a little bit. Yeah. Anything about the themes of today? Anything else?
I've got a small little anecdote of the universe just breaking a small little, maybe insignificant hell loop that I was going through the other day, just waking up frustrated, dealing with some of my own stuff. And then I was doing laundry and I banged my head really hard against the dryer door. And it only exacerbated the frustration, but only for a little bit, because then I used that moment to be like, oh, I need to get out of this frustrated hell loop. So I went outside and just stared at the sun and like breathed for 10 minutes and realized that some things are already deconstructed, and we can just like access them. And sometimes it just needs a little bit of a wake up, like a aha moment, you know?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, the hell loops are like I like to always look at all of these things on like on all the levels and all the different stratas in the genealogy of the social thing, like from the bigger kind of picture to the very minute ways in which we, I don't know, let's say anthropomorphism. But it's the same with hell loops, right? Like you see like reactionary helplessness on the scale, and it kind of helps you understand where like the drawn to far right reactionary waves are coming from. And it also helps you put it in context in the helplessness, so that what Foucault likes to call the sad militant that exists in more like liberatory leftist cultures as well, the kind of the suffering revolutionary. But then it also, yeah, it exists like in all of the levels. So even the tiniest of things, like, oh, I'm in a hell loop right now. Let me go out and take in some sun and take a breath and reach out to a friend,
I'm trying to think of more hell loops to name. And I guess, I don't know, this denial of death, our relationship with death as humanity, and our um, uh, constant goals of evading death. And nationalism, would that be a hell loop?
Talking about death, something that I actually was thinking about and forgot to mention there is, you said beautifully, the denial of death, but then I would love to hear more you articulate what you mean by nationalism, but I was thinking maybe you mean like something that transcends material conditions. So we can say things like incarnation or life after death. That I wouldn't say necessarily is a hell loop, but it is some kind, like it feels to me like two oppositionary thing. Like on one hand, there is like a denial of death or a completely secular approach to death, and on the other hand, there is like, oh, finding all kinds of meaning in all kinds of mythologies and stories that kind of tell us like, okay, yes, this body will die, but it continues somehow because I have this special, unique soul that kind of keeps incarnating or something like that. And maybe something that breaks that loop is this sacred relationship with grief and death as like a continuum. It's not that you have a unique soul that continues incarnating probably, but more like you keep incarnating because your body dies and then it decomposes and it feeds other things and become part of the biosphere, and it keeps going on. And the same, if you have children, then your genetics continue on, like your ancestors live in your body. So there is a continuum. We don't have to go to these transcendental stories of special places for special souls. It's here. And we also don't have to, and of course, the denial of death on the other hand, or the kind of moving away or using technology and science to try to get away from death or extend life as much as possible as an obsession. I like that. That's good. What do you mean by nationalism?
Literally just mindless nationalism. Just the way the earth has been carved up into, spaces, borders and militaries and rules and, restricted travel and stuff that didn't necessarily exist very long ago that now seems to be like the dominant reality.
Margot said something that contributes to that as well, like martyrdom, glorifying certain kinds of death, dying for your country as a noble cause, which is part of nationalism.
Yeah, I think it goes hand in hand.
Yeah, maybe we can say that like nationalism or this kind of national martyrdom is part of like the incarnation thing in some way. It's like a transcendental thing outside of these material conditions that you need to sacrifice your life for, or that you are moving towards. The same with Christian the next life, anything that is outside of this reality, this biosphere. Nice. Yeah, that's good. I will add it as well in the
It's making me think about death, how we had talked about some in our last conversation about this as well, and your idea of infinite becomings. So an alternate perspective, right? That we are always dying, that things are in constant flux and change, or the Buddhist notion of impermanence. So death is neither finite nor this infinite loop, but it's always part of our every moment experience, right? So it almost makes death more accessible when you recognize it in everything at all times, because I have a tendency to put death on a pedestal as this great Mysterian, profound transition, so that demystifies it and makes it more accessible.
Yeah.
Another thing I'm finding myself doing as we're talking is like making a running. Okay, I'm a language nerd. I'll just put that up there. Hopefully, it won't be exhausting for others. You can check me, but I do study language as part of my work, and it's my pleasure. And so I'm finding myself making a running list of words that might constitute one way of thinking, like the binaries, atomized, separated, and then coming up with like its contrast. So, for like a border versus a membrane, right? Or finite, static versus dynamic. So those are helpful ways for me to sort of organize my thinking. But I'm wondering after this call if I might also do something with like qualities to cultivate in myself, like dispositions. For me, always like, so for instance, you talked about cultivating awe, or in the chat, someone mentioned, humility or self-awareness. Like, what are the qualities that I want to bring to this experimental or this exploration, and bringing them to making them conscious and explicit for myself so that I can then sort of reference them to see if that's actually where I'm functioning from. I don't know if that kind of thinking is useful to anyone else.
Yeah, and I would love if you can, both the things that you mentioned, if you can share them in the group study chat.
Okay, group study chat. Wait. Make sure I put it in the right place. Which one is that? That's in the under food forest? Or is that?
No,
Sorry.
if in the Discord you have like the kind of chat groups from emergency to emergence, and then you have like group study
Yes.
chat, it's called.
Okay. Yeah, I see it. All right. Thank you.
I would name it like food forest, but I think people who haven't come into the things, they don't know what it is. So, and
Okay.
at the same time, people who would not coming into this are not going to write there. So I don't know. Maybe I'll just rename it food forest chats. Let's do it right now. We make things more clear. So yeah, I think in general, like if you guys have further contemplations, yeah, things that come up, would be cool to continue the conversation in this next weeks. Especially, let's keep develop hell loops. I feel like this is a good. It's fun as well. Like, yeah.
I'm just really thinking about death, like as an interesting piece to this. Like it is like it in the US, it's like so countercultural to like actually be open about death. Like I lost someone and like talking about it, like talking like I lost my mom in 2020 and she was very much like when you're done, you're done. Like when you're gone, you're gone. And like it was like the very like practical work of like caring for her body as she was dying and like burying her was so deeply healing for me, like to be able to care for her in like the myriad ways that she cared for me as a child. And also feeling like, but I can't talk about that to a lot of people because like they don't get it. Or like it's just like way to make it weird, a really good way to make it weird to like talk about death. And I like teach teenagers and I teach biology. So I sometimes talk about my family in like the context of genetics or like it comes up and like by this point in the year, all of my kids know that my mom is dead. It will like almost always come up like someone will like say something about like your mom and I'm like, oh yeah, she's dead. Like and it's trying to like make it less weird, but it's like a disposition that I have to be like, I'm not going to feel weird about talking about someone that I love when they're not here anymore, just because it makes somebody else uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And like modeling that for kids, like modeling that for the people that I'm around. Because she's still very much present with me, right? Like her influence is like in me in uncountable ways. And to like feel like you can't talk about that is weird. But also like we're surrounded by death. Like the cobalt in my phone is, like everything about Empire is like blood stained. So it's like literally in and on everything that we touch. If we are in the heart of Empire, and yet like you cannot talk about it. It is like so socially unacceptable. Like it's a really dysfunctional relationship that we have with death. And if it was like, it's not that weird. Like death is like a thing that is definitely going to happen to all of us. Like
Nobody's
having a
coming out
healthy
alive.
nobody comes out of this alive.
I'm reminding it's my mantra now. I'm like, well, nobody's coming out alive. May as well. I love how the conversations in this always bring back to death. It makes me feel like I'm in the right place. Like last 2 weeks ago, we had one of our bonfires, like community session, which are not recorded, and the whole thing was just about death. And I'm loving it. I think this is somehow yeah. There is a whole food forest dedicated to death, maybe even a few. I'm happy that it came up again, so we could add it to the hell loops.
It seems like denial of death might be the master hell loop. that all of the other hell loops come from.
Completely.
Like, I feel like why are all of these oligarchs so obsessed with health and like so obsessed with staying alive forever, or like uploading your consciousness into AI or getting off this planet? It's like, let me please disembody myself, because I can't deal with the fact that one day I'm not going to be here. It's like a really fucked up position to have.
Yeah, we're also so detached from the continuity of nature. So we said, I'm not going to be here. So first of all, we are fixated on the self and the identity, like we spoke about. Like, I don't know if you were here, Margot, but at the beginning, we talked about identity and ideology. So we are fixed on that identity. So the idea of the identity dying is what we perceive as death. And then we come up with all of these ideas that try to somehow co-op with death, but still maintain some identity. So we have a soul, and a soul that continues, and incarnation, and all next life, as if you are going to sit there as you are among your the angels and marinate in something, whatever. When, like, you don't have to go that far. Like, yeah, the identity dies, but identity never existed anyway. There was no point in your history that you were ever an identity that is stabilized. It's always dying and becoming and being created into something else. And the death of this body is just another portal in that continuation. You become food in the food sphere, like everything, like a leaf that is falling from the tree and then rotting on the ground and being eaten by fungi and become foods for the worms. That's it. As Ram Dass used to say, death is like taking off a tight shoe, you know? So yeah, definitely good that we added it there. Thank you for bringing it back, you know?
Well, I was just trying to, relate it to my own experiences going on right now. And it feels like I'm surrounded right now by elderly people with cancer who are dying and all trying desperately to survive, and nobody wanting to talk about end of life planning because it's awkward, and nobody wanting to talk about the news that's going on in the what did you call it? The wider boundary lens of consequences. We're not able to have bigger discussions because we're focused on the emergency at hand. People are dying in the house, don't or just encountering seriously dysfunctional grief processes in myself and other people around me. Like, it seems like we're seriously enmeshed in this hell loop of death denial right now, as like a household and a neighborhood and everybody else, you know.
I think this is a good time to bring this to completion. Yeah.